first settlers here in the early 1800s were the Sinup Indians, who were part of the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. They inhabited the land between Lake Sammamish and Lake Washington. They did not live here, they just used it to travel and to hunt and to pick the berries. The Native Americans used the word squaw to describe the swampy lowland of the valley, and the early white settlers in turn named the waterway Squaw Slough, which was later renamed Sammamish River. This meandering waterway was not only the main transportation of the early pioneers, it was the only mode of transportation. The Native Americans were used for picking hops, and we grew hops here in the valley and in Kent and in Issaquah, because in the valley floor there were no trees and the ground was very fertile. And what happened was in Europe, a virus came through and wiped out all the hop plants. Well, after a while, those Germans and those British got tired of being without their beer and were willing to pay anything to have it restored. So these hops were picked, shipped into Seattle, put on a ship that went around South America because the Panama Canal was not open yet, and traveled across the Atlantic Ocean to get to Europe. Very expensive hops. They were growing for a long time until 2 years in a row, aphids attacked the plants voraciously, and this was before DDT, so everybody then pulled out their plants. The first white settlers were the Woodins. They homesteaded 2 blocks west of Old Woodinville towards Bothell. In the fall of 1871, the railroad company released the land, and this was the first time it was open to homesteading. The homestead law at the time said a family could have up to 160 acres. You could either buy it outright for $200, which is what the Woodins did, or you could pay $10 for your 160 acres and prove it up. Or if you didn't have the $10, which a lot of them did not, they would homestead and claim 80 acres, pay $5, and come back later and get the other 80 acres. This is an aerial view showing the Squaw Slough and how it meandered all over. There's your slough. On the upper right-hand corner, you have the south end of San Michelle Winery. On the far left corner, up on the top where the white is, that's northeast 124th. It did not go across the valley at this point in time. This is a 1936 aerial view. The big dark line at the bottom is the Sammamish Slough as it was redredged. In 1912, the Redmond farmers between the city of Redmond and 145th, which is where the winery in Red Hook is, they assessed themselves $60,000 to straighten out the slough. This piece of the waterway got reduced from 12 miles to 6. What was interesting is the family legend goes that when the McRedmonds came through to settle in Redmond, the only people here were the Woodins, and they stopped and spent the night. Mr. McRedmond was newly married to a widow, and she had 2 previous children, and she was definitely very pregnant. So they said, well, when your time comes, let us know. We'll come down and help you, because there were no other white settlers in the area. So her time came, and she told her husband, don't worry about it. I have an Indian midwife here. I've already had 2 children. Number 3 is going to be a charm. Well, he was a first-time father, and he wasn't going to accept this, so he got in his rowboat, and he rowed up that curvy slough to the Woodins. They got them and went back home. A day and a half later, he arrived back to a very healthy wife and a little baby girl. This is a picture of the Woodin family. Seated, you have Ira and Susan. You have Helen on the left, who was 7 years old when she came, and Mary on the right, who was 4, and Frank, who was born in Woodinville in 1878. This is their second home. Their first home was a cabin. This one was built right next door, across from what used to be the Chassis Cedar Company on the old road between Bothell and Woodinville. The house was used as a school, a church, and a post office. Susan Woodin said that it was a lot easier selling butter than being a postmaster. She was postmaster for 9 years. Originally, anyone who was in Seattle would say, "Do you have anything for Woodinville?" And they would bring it out. Later, when the ferries arrived across Lake Washington from Seattle to Kirkland, the mail would be held at the Kirkland post office until someone was down there to pick it up and bring it. Now, until Bothell became a city, they didn't have a mailing address other than Woodinville, so they had to come out here to pick it up. Susan Woodin compares it to selling butter. This is how they made. Ira had a logging company, but Susan had the dairy cows, and she made it into butter. They brought the dairy cows with them because they knew that that grass in the valley was very sweet and would make good tasting butter. Now this is where, depending where you've read, there's a disagreement of a fact whether she rode herself into Seattle twice a week, once a week, twice a month, or as the family thinks, probably once a month to sell her butter. We do know that she had the rowboat. She went by herself, rowed down the slough to Kenmore, down along Lake Washington to where the hydroplane races are. And because there was a park there, the cable car came over the hill from Seattle. But he charged 10 cents to go each way, and she didn't want to spend the money, so the cable director took her butter, dropped it off in Seattle, and she walked. She would then deliver her butter to the homes for $2.50 a pound. And you know what it's running now. She made it, that was a good deal. And then she would walk herself back up over the hill, row back up the lake, and up the stream to home. And because Ira was in the logging business, he was at his logging camp most of the time. The second set of settlers came a couple years later. We had Emanuel Nilsson and Gustav Jacobson. They were brothers who immigrated from Norway. Emanuel Nilsson is the one who changed his name. They each homesteaded 160 acres next to Woodin's, and Emanuel and his wife Greta had one daughter, Mary B., and I'll refer to her as Mary B. to keep her straight here. She married Eric Jatterholm when she was 16. You notice he's a little older. They homesteaded 160 acres adjacent to her father and adjoining the Woodins. And this is very important because this is where the business district of Woodinville started. The Calkins came a couple years later. They homesteaded their 160 acres about where Mulbach's is. They were the first one on the other side of the slough, and they gave the land for the school. When Nelson's came, it was in the fall and very rainy again, typical winter rains. They did not have a house, so they used the cedar stump as a shelter. If you have trouble visualizing the Seattle Times artist's vision, we have a photograph that shows an actual stump house from 1901. And this is up by Arlington. Now, this shows the size of our virgin timber. Note that how many people are living in this. We have the 2 kids in front. In the doorway, you have mother, father, and another child. This is Emmanuel and Greta Nelson with their grandson, Billy. Billy became our first mail carrier, and when Mary B. was his mother, and when she was widowed and remarried, then Billy went to live with his grandparents. The third set of pioneers was Arthur Llewellyn Calkins, where Molbach's is. He came here from Kansas in 1877, and he gave the land to the school. In 1905, these are the homesteads that have been proved up. We have the Woodins in an L shape, and we can see where the slough runs from Bothell down to Redmond. And you can see where the railroad is from Seattle going south to Redmond, and then branching and going up to Snohomish and on to Canada. 175th is right here. See the school right there? That's on the corner of Calkins' property. Right across from it, on an angle, right there is the cemetery. That's the 1 acre that Ira Wooden gave. We have Mary B.'s land there called Jatter Home. Her father, Emmanuel Nelson, next to her. And we have Gustav Jacobson, his brother, right there. This is the one that grew the hops and later had our golf course. Just south of him is Andrew Anderson. This is Elmer Carlberg's grandfather. Elmer Carlberg is the one that had the house with the round turret and was caretaker of our cemetery. Over to the right is Carolina Peterson, and right there at the corner on the far bottom is our new roundabout. A Seattle investment group headed by Judge Thomas Burke and Daniel Gilman founded the Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern Railway system out of frustration that the Northern Pacific Railway decided to terminate its line in Tacoma rather than Seattle. So they built their own railroad. It reached Woodinville in 1887. One branch went north to Snohomish and on to Sumas and the Canadian Railroad system, and the other one went to south to Redmond and down to Squawk or Issaquah. And we had a split here. This triangle at Woodinville allowed the trains to change direction. It is still the only place between Seattle and the Canadian border that allows the trains to change position. This was very important because without this Y and be able to turn around, Woodinville would have become just another flag stop. It would be similar to Derby, Willows, York, or Grace. But instead, we got a stop. The trains actually had to stop so they could switch tracks which way they were going. People got out. So for the first time, you had a need for stores, you had a need for roads. Until the railroad came, there were no roads in Woodinville. The first store was built by Wooden. It was a Wooden Sanders store. It was built on pilings. The Rainier Saloon came next, the American House by Nilsson, and then various other buildings. This will show you what we have where. There's that slough still meandering all over. Here's the railroad that's coming from Bothell and Seattle going north, and then the other one going south. Do you see that big triangle there? Where number 27 is, you have where the turnabouts were. They were actually round turnabouts. There were 3 of them, and they could actually put the engine on and turn it around. We have the railroad depot. We have the stores, the first store, the saloon. In 1890, Mary B. here platted the town of Woodinville. She laid it all out in streets. We have Front Street, Second Street. We have Nielsen Avenue, named after her father. We have Jatterholm Avenue, named after her first husband. And it was all filed. We did not become a city till more than 100 years later, in 1993. This is a picture of the first railroad depot. It was called Woodinville Junction. It was named by the railroad people. If you'll notice the railroad tracks in the front, there's also railroad tracks in the back. The trains came twice a day, one way going north, one way going south. A permanent depot was built in 1893. This is a photo of the second depot, which was built exactly from the plans of the first one. And the reason we have 2 is in 1916, the Ballard locks opened, which dropped Lake Washington 9 feet, which meant it no longer had to be on pilings. So instead of moving it, they actually built another one identical to the first. Notice up on the top roof, we have some barrels and we have ladders up there to walk. This is to put out the fires, and there were a lot of fires from the trains. This is the first store. It was built in 1888 on pilings. This photo dates from 1911, after the Wooden and Sanders family sold it. Notice the slough is right behind you. The water's there. Notice the wood planking. The wood planking goes directly to the train station because it's very muddy and ucky every day. And so the people getting off the train wouldn't get their shoes dirty to walk to the store. Now notice the kid there. We have very resourceful pioneers. The next building was Rainier's Saloon and the Junction Hotel. It was built in 1889, also built on pilings over the slough. It was owned by the Seattle Brewing and Malt Company. The restaurant upstairs was operated by Bill Bell. Now, just to the left out of the photo where you can't see on the side of the building, there were stairs going up. This is so respectable women could go get something to eat or to stay, because they weren't supposed to be seen in saloons. What is interesting is in August of 1912, the King County Commissioners did not renew their liquor license based on a citizen petition 8 years before Prohibition. Now you got to realize there were not very many families in Woodinville at this time, but there were still a lot of logging camps and sawmills, and they released all these single men Friday evening. And where did they go? American House was built on Mary B.'s land, and it was the first one on the other side of the railroad tracks, which meant it was dry. It did not have to be built on pilings. It operated as a grocery store and a hotel. It burned down about 1900. Now, what you need to know is look at the trees and things that are still there. This is the way they logged. They left big messes. This is a picture of Front Street taken from 1912 to 1914. It is taken right from the intersection where 175th goes across the bridge. There's now the light there, and we are looking towards Bothell. The electricity and telephones came to this part of Woodinville in 1910. But notice the road is still dirt. The businesses that were on this street are just out of the corner on the left. Attached to the big building you see is John Cook's blacksmith shop. You have Dodd's Adjustable School Desk Factory, Parsons Hotel and Restaurant, Emmanuel Nilsson's General Merchandise Store, and Tea Garden Store way at the bottom. To the right of, you can see one railroad car way down there sitting on the railroad tracks. You have the railroad depot we showed you a picture of, the Wooden Sanders store we showed you a picture of, and the Rainier Saloon. Starting back in the front, right there next to the intersection, this is John Cook's blacksmith shop. He is the fourth one from the left in his working gear. We have a young boy there delivering, and the pipes in front, we believe, are 1-inch water lines that Mary B. had 3 wells on her hill just above her place, and she supplied water to all that side of Woodinville. Notice the horse. It's going to appear again. This is our young delivery boy, which we'd really love to find his name, but haven't at this point. The sign up there says Seeley and Pelton Veterinary Surgeons. This is the inside of John Cook's blacksmith shop, and because of that horse's tail on the far left, we believe it was taken at the same time. It should be noted that in early 1900s, blacksmiths had to really do a lot. They shoed the horses, they repaired the wagons, they had to take care of all the lumbering supplies. We have axe handles up there from the logging companies, and we had to repair all the early automobiles. He is by his anvil, which is now his headstone in the Woodinville Cemetery. The next building is the Dodd's Adjustable School Desk Factory. Mr. Dodd arrived in Woodinville as a teacher for the 7th and 8th grade. He was a small man, and he had a little trouble with discipline with the 7th and 8th grade boys who were bigger than he was, because a lot of them had been repeating quite a few grades. He also became very frustrated that the school desks that would fit a 6-year-old did not fit someone who was 20. So he and his brother came up with a design to make adjustable desks, and they sold stock to the local residents in order to build this building. Well, he had a little problem as a businessman, and he went bankrupt. So in 1909, the building was sold to the Ruel brothers for a store. They already had a previous store in Woodinville at that time. Games Plus is located here today. This is a picture of the Dodd's Adjustable School Desk. The top lowers down and the seat lowers down, and this cute little lady is Gracie. She is a wooden descendant. In 1909, the Ruel brothers obtained the building, and this was prior to the electricity. So they imported French plate glass windows in order to let the light into the building. The upstairs was used as a community center. But before they could actually move in, the Woodinville school burned down. So the school students were there for 2 years. The next building down on the street is Parsons Hotel and Restaurant. It was built prior to 1909, and it replaced the American House. In 1923, it was bought by Glendenning, who was the station agent, and the railroad station was directly across the railroad tracks from his house. This was torn down in 1944. Notice that the Woodinville, on the far right, the Woodinville Mercantile has been built. In between there and the Mercantile is Emanuel Nilsson's store. Remember, he came with the second set, and he's Mary B's father. He opened this in 1895. The high porch makes it easy to load the wagons. He lived in the house behind on the left, and there were living quarters up above. And this is where his great-grandson, John Halver, was born. Dr. Halver is currently a professor of fisheries at the University of Washington. In 1927, the Woodinville Mercantile replaced this building. This is the inside of Emanuel Nilsson's store, and we were able to date this photo to 1916 because there's a poster right there. And if you blow it up, it's advertising the senior play at Bothell High School. What you should note is, even though it's 1916 and electricity has been available for 6 years, there's none in this store. He was a widower by then, and we have a feeling he just may have let things go the way they are. He lit this place with his gas lantern. The glass case in front houses the very precious things: cigarettes, tobacco, pipes. It's there. Note that he has no cash register. He used the old-fashioned way of writing in the books. And the other thing you should note is way in the back is a hanging sausage. And there are scales back there. And if you got off the train and you didn't want to go to the saloon, you could walk into the general store and you could buy sausage by the slice. And he would sell it to you. He sold everything. He has canvas tarps and blankets, horse feeding bags, gloves, brooms, oil lanterns, sacks of sugar and salt, cans of salt, Carol's syrup, Libby's evaporated milk, Astor's evaporated milk, jars of ketchup, olive oil, spices, empty canning jars, and the boxes of carnation mush, Quaker rolled white oats, Quaker cornmeal, goldenrod oats, Alber's rolled oats. Obviously, that was a big seller. The next shop down was Tea Gardens. It was built in 1890. It was originally a mercantile store built by Milt Russell of Bothell. In 1904, he sold it to Clara and Sarah Jacobsons. They were both born here in Woodinville on Jacobson's property. Remember, he's the brother of Emanuel Nilsson, and this is where the hops were grown and the golf course was. Now, Clara also became a teacher, one of our first teachers here in Woodinville, and what is his note is that she was a University of Washington graduate long before teachers were required to have college degrees. And for years, Mr. Harry Teagarden, who was a Quaker, courted Clara. And as the family said, it was very humorous. Clara would say, "I am not going to marry you unless you change the spelling of your name. Teagarden should be spelled T-E-E. And you are spelling it And he says, "But we're British. It's always been spelled that way." And she says, "No, not anymore." And if you'll notice, he wrote it that way, she wrote it that way, and unfortunately, Harry died first, so we know how it's spelled in the cemetery. If you go back one thing, I forgot the car. It is a 1915 Model T touring sedan, brand new, cost $490, and it came in the choice of colors, black. If you cross the bridge, this is what you see on 175th, back looking towards the intersection of where we were. Notice that the bridge is wood planks. It was built by Mr. Emanuel Nielsen. He designed an ox pile driver to build this bridge and the Stringtown Bridge, which was closer to Bothell. It has protection for the pedestrians because the school is now on this side of the river, and most of the residences with the kids are on the other side of the river, so they have to walk. Starting on the far left, we have Boyd Hargis's boarding house. We have Helen Hanson's Mary B's barn. We have John Cook's blacksmith shop, the Ruel Brothers store, the Forester's Lodge, and finally the Ruel House, which is built on pilings and later was moved to solid ground. The Forester's building was built in 1894 by Andrew Hanson, Mary B's second husband, and the Foresters developed as sort of a fraternal insurance to take care of all the loggers, all the sawmill workers, because there was no medical insurance, there was no life insurance, and these were both dangerous professions. After the need wasn't there, the building stood vacant because the Ruel brothers, who were using the bottom part, moved up to where the Dodds Adjustable School Gas factory was. When the DeYoung family came here from Kent in 1925, the building was still standing, and Anna Francis remembers very much that for Christmas the previous year, she had gotten a pair of metal roller skates that you clamped onto your shoes, and she was very frustrated because Woodinville didn't have any sidewalks, they didn't have any paved roads. So how was she going to use her roller skates? Well, no one locked their doors. So she discovered this nice empty building, and on the second floor was this wonderful wood floor she could skate on. We have the Woodinville Tavern, which is a 1956 photo here. It was originally called Boyd's Place, built in 1903, and it operated until 1972, and it was torn down for McCory's on the slough. Hargis boarding house is on the left. It was built in 1910. It was remodeled to house the railroad crew who maintained the railroad lines, and in 1947 became a hotel and was not torn down until about almost 1960. We can't leave Woodinville without mentioning the sawmills. This is Machias. It is located across from the Wilmot Gateway Park. It was started in 1903 by Colonel Miller and C. Niemeyer. Jesse Brown bought the mill in 1911 and operated it until 1926. The DeYoungs bought it after that and operated it until the mid-1940s. Jesse Brown also had mills at Grace, which he operated. Around 1940, Mr. Meredith from Kent started the Saginaw Mill, which was 300 feet south of Machias, and he operated that until 1980. Jesse Brown also had his dairy mill, which was on 100 acres, purchased from the Woodins, and it stretches from McClendon's Hardware to Home Depot in Bothell. It was very modern for its time. They washed and groomed each cow before they milked it. They bottled the milk. They delivered it into Seattle to the homes for 9 cents a quart. Jesse Brown's grandson, Bus Brown, bought the dairy business in 1949 and operated it for 10 years until 522 was built, dividing the dairy business into 2 parts. If we go back to the original Y, which is the business district of Woodinville, you see Front Street there and the current businesses. You see the railroad, and you see the DeYoung feed mill, which operated from 1944 to 1984. Where those round cylinders were, the DeYoungs originally had their packing shed and ice house from the 1930s. As we cross the bridge, the 3 important things we see are the Woodinville Cemetery with the 1 acre of land donated by the Woodins, the Little White Methodist Church built in 1905, and the 4 wooden schools. Note that it's wooden, not Woodinville. This is a picture of the Woodinville Cemetery. Note that the road is not paved, the sidewalk is wood, and the church way back there is the Little White Church, and the main road, this is 175th, and if you continued on, would be running past Mulbach's. The main road took a left right here and went to Snohomish. If you went straight ahead, that was residential. It was not the main part of Woodinville. In this early cemetery, we have our pioneers, Ira and Susan Woodin, Emanuel Nilsson in the second set of pioneers, his brother Gustav Jacobson with the second set, Arthur Calkins, who donated the land for the wooden school, John Cook, the village blacksmith, with his anvil as a headstone, Clara Teagarden, our early school teacher and proprietor of Teagarden Shops, and Elmer Karlberg, who was many years the cemetery caretaker. This is a photo of that Little White Church that was built in 1905. Our photo is about 1917, showing some of our early pioneers. Now, they always had church services. They started in the wooden parlor, and it moved to wherever there was school services, the schools, and that's where they used it. Notice the school in the back. The school was built on land donated by the Calkins family, who had homesteaded their 160 acres, and it was built in 1892. All 8 grades were taught by 1 teacher, and the enrollment originally was 30 kids. The teacher was paid $50 for 8 months of school, plus room and board with the Calkins family because they had the most kids. This school did not have indoor plumbing, and it was served by a shallow well next to the school. This is our 2-room schoolhouse, which opened about 1905. It had 72 students when it opened. Notice in the back is our 1-room schoolhouse. It's been moved back there for a teacher's residence, and they call that the teacherage. In the fall of 1907, they were heating the school, and they got a little exuberant with a fire in the stove, and so the sparks went out the chimney and caught the roof on fire, so the school burned down, but the school kids were able to take out most of the books. So for 2 years, they moved over to the adjustable Dodge school desk factory, which was now vacant, and stayed there. In 1910, this school opened as the first brick school on the east side of Lake Washington. The architect goofed. He very carefully designed the building, put a water fountain right inside the front door, but forgot about any other indoor plumbing. So the poor teacher got kicked out of the teacherage. They took that one-room schoolhouse, put a division down the center, and made it into the boys' and girls' restrooms. In 1913, they actually got 3 teachers. Currently, in 1934, the 4th school was built, which incorporates one wall of that 1910 school. Because if it was a remodeling project, the WPA would pay for it. If it was a new school, they would not. So that wall still stands. The school was remodeled in 1948 with additions on the left. This is the school as it stands.